Hi biologists, let's start by looking at the learning objectives for this lesson. At the end of this section and following the biology syllabus, you should be able to define and understand the role of aerobic respiration. Represent respiration by a balanced equation of the overall sequence of reactions for glucose. Define anaerobic respiration and refer to fermentation. What does this actually mean? What are we trying to learn? Well, it's straightforward enough. First of all, you have to be able to give the definition of aerobic respiration and understand the role of aerobic respiration or understand its function. You have to be able to give a balanced equation for the process of respiration. You have to be able to define anaerobic respiration and realize that it can also be called fermentation. Let's start respiration and by giving a shout out to Anya who inspired this video. A simple definition of respiration is that it is the release of energy from food. Therefore, it is a chemical reaction. Now, the food is usually glucose, which is rather interesting because that ties in with the food chapter where we learned that glucose is a source of energy in our diet. Now, as we have said, respiration is a series of chemical reactions. And this release of energy is controlled by enzymes. That's very important because a lot of this energy could be released as heat. And if this was not controlled by enzymes, then we would spontaneously combust. So obviously, not all the energy is lost as heat. It is controlled by enzymes, which allows the energy to be released in small amounts. And a lot of the energy is actually trapped by a chemical called ATP or adenosine triphosphate. So when we look at respiration, we realize that a large molecule like glucose, C6H12O6, make sure we know the formula, is broken down into smaller molecules or chemicals, in other words, carbon dioxide and water, with the release of energy. So as we can see, this is a catabolic reaction or catabolism. At this point, it might be no harm to revise what we have already learned about catabolism and anabolism. If you want to skip through this little bit of revision, it'll take about 3 minutes. You can move ahead and continue with respiration. Remember, there are 2 types of metabolism. These were anabolic reactions, anabolism, or catabolic reactions, or catabolism. Anabolic reactions was where simple chemicals are changed into complicated or complex chemicals using enzymes and using energy. I like to think of anabolism as USA, using enzymes, using energy. S, taking simple chemicals, making them into complicated ones. That's anabolism, USA. Examples of anabolic reactions were photosynthesis, because we are taking simple chemicals, the ingredients, carbon dioxide and water, and changing them into a complicated chemical called glucose, using enzymes and using the energy of the sun. So you can see how it is a case in point for the definition of anabolism. Another example of anabolic reactions is taking amino acids, simple subunits of protein, to make muscle protein. You might have heard of anabolic steroids taken to build muscle. Another anabolic reaction is taking simple units of glucose to make the more complicated polysaccharide called cellulose. Catabolic reactions, very similar definition containing similar key points. Catabolic reactions, catabolism, is where complicated, complex chemicals, C and C, not Chanel, C and C, catabolic reactions, complicated chemicals, are changed into simple chemicals, again using enzymes, but this time releasing energy. Examples of catabolic reactions are respiration, where glucose is broken down to release energy from food, and you are making the simple chemicals carbon dioxide and water. So you can see clearly how respiration illustrates a catabolic reaction. Digestion of food, the same idea, breaking down complicated biomolecules into simple subunits like glucose units, fatty acids and glycerol, or amino acids. And decay of dead plants and animals is another catabolic reaction. So we might think of crap. We won't say that too loud though. C for catabolic reactions, example, respiration. A for anabolic reactions or anabolism, and P for photosynthesis. Shh, crap. So, in a nutshell, respiration is a catabolic reaction because we're breaking down the glucose. It is controlled by enzymes, and obviously it releases energy. Which brings us to the role of respiration. Now, as a reminder, respiration occurs in both plant and animal cells. It is a characteristic of life. Energy released in respiration is used for growth, repair, response, movement, digestion, excretion, and reproduction. So in a nutshell, really, the role of respiration is to produce energy which will allow cells to grow and repair themselves and allow living organisms to respond to the environment, move, digest their food, carry out excretion and reproduction. Therefore, if you like, respiration is a very important metabolic process or chemical reaction in all living organisms. And that is the role of respiration, which is an objective of this lesson. Now, there are two types of respiration. There is aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. Most living things get their energy from aerobic respiration. So let's have a brief look at each of these in turn. Aerobic respiration. Knowing the definition of aerobic respiration is an objective of this lesson, so we have to make it our business to learn it. Aerobic respiration is the controlled release of energy because it is governed by enzymes from food using oxygen. We can connect the idea of using oxygen with the word aerobic. Organisms that respire aerobically or get energy out of their food using oxygen are called aerobes. Now, respiration, as we've said, is a series of chemical reactions. It is actually a very complicated process, but we can represent it or summarize it by a single chemical equation. Another objective of this lesson. This is the chemical equation to represent respiration. And as we can see, glucose here is doing a chemical reaction with oxygen gas because it's aerobic respiration and involves oxygen, forming the products carbon dioxide and water and releasing energy. Now, the chemists amongst us will realise that this equation is not balanced. Balancing equations means that you have the same number of atoms on the left-hand side as you have on the right. Because we are biologists, we needn't worry about the mechanics of this. We'll just make use of a little trick to get this correct or to keep it balanced. Basically, everyone is bringing a six-pack to this party except the guy with the food. So we will put a big 6 in front of the oxygen. And we will put a big 6 in front of the carbon dioxide. And we will put a big 6 in front of the water. So everybody, all the chemicals in this equation, has a big 6 in front of them, except the guy with the food, except the glucose. So now the equation is balanced. And not forgetting, of course, that this reaction is a catabolic reaction. It's also crap, don't forget, as we've just revised. C for catabolic, or for respiration. So respiration is a catabolic reaction. A for anabolism. P for photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is an anabolic reaction. Now, a lot of energy is produced as the glucose is completely and utterly broken down to carbon dioxide and water. The energy produced is in the form of heat and in the form of chemical energy because it is stored in the chemical called ATP. As we have said already, there are two types of respiration, so now let's look at the second type, which is anaerobic respiration. Now, the definition of anaerobic respiration is another objective of this lesson, so we have to make sure that we learn it off by heart. The definition is similar to aerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration is the controlled release of energy from food, but this time without the use of oxygen. Organisms that carry out anaerobic respiration are called anaerobes. Anaerobic respiration is also known as fermentation or making alcohol. Now, anaerobic respiration releases only a small amount of energy compared to aerobic respiration because the glucose is only partially broken down. It doesn't get broken down completely to carbon dioxide and water. And there you have it. Practice in a jotter. Now that we have reached the end of our lesson, have we achieved our objective? Can you define and understand the role of aerobic respiration? Can you represent respiration by a balanced equation of the overall sequence of reactions for glucose? And finally, can you define anaerobic respiration and refer to fermentation?